Hello, I'm Rachel Babin from the Oncology Network, proud producers of the OJC Meets podcast series. What issues inspire young oncologists in Australia today? What are their greatest challenges and hopes for the future? Join Eva Segelov as she finds out in the OJC Meets Yoga. Yoga is the Young Oncology Group of Australia, an organisation designed to support the transition from advanced trainee to consultant. Eva chats candidly with Jess Smith and Milita Zaheed from the Yoga Group, covering everything from EMR management to work-life balance, COVID to public speaking, CV writing to diverse training pathways. In today's episode, we take a deep dive into the issues affecting young oncologists today. I hope you enjoy listening. You'll find the bios and Twitter handles in the notes on our website. For regular news and podcast updates, we invite healthcare professionals to join us at oncologinetwork.com.au. It's free and it's a fantastic way to support the OJC. This is Rachel Babin, and this is the Oncology Podcast.
G'day. This is OJC Meets Yoga. Now, if you had visuals, you might think it's going to be of me in tight pants with my legs contorted over my ears. And I'm sure that vision is just probably making you pull over the car and go to the side of the road and not feeling too well. But that's not what yoga is. So today, as an old fart in oncology, I am going to interview two young, vibrant women who have their whole oncology future ahead of them and find out what the younger generation of oncologists really think about, well, anything I want to ask them about. So it's a very warm welcome. Hey, Rachel, isn't this good? I'm speaking not to Craig and Hans, but to two other women. Welcome, Jess Smith. How are you, Jess?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having us here.
Fantastic. And Milita Zaheed.
Hello. Nice to be here.
Welcome. So let's just start with yoga because, as you know, we've got an international audience, 6 listeners in Belgium, I always say. But for those who don't know, what is yoga?
So yoga stands for the Young Oncologists Group of Australia. So it's really for those who have obtained fellowship and within their first 5 years. And we help really with that transitioning over to being a consultant. And we help to look after the professional development, the things you didn't necessarily learn as a trainee, but you need as a consultant, and really provide that extra networking side as well.
Milita, this never existed when I was a trainee. I don't even think we had trainee associations then. We just did what we were told. So you are the outgoing president, is that correct?
I'm the outgoing deputy chair and Jess is the incoming chair for yoga.
Fantastic. So tell us a little bit more about each of you. Jess?
Yeah, so I am a medical oncologist. I work at Macquarie University with the clinical trials unit part-time, whilst trying to do a PhD part-time, doing teaching with Western Sydney University as well. So, bit of everything. And I've been involved with yoga for a few years now and really looking forward to what's coming up over the next 12 months or so, especially as we've got quite a few of the new fellows coming through who are really energetic and exciting to work with.
Oh, that sounds better than us oldies. Milita, what's your story?
Well, I'm a medical oncologist as well, and I guess this is something that a lot of the young oncologists probably experience, and we might touch on later on in terms of the lack of sort of, I suppose, traditional opportunities that is around. And so I also dual trained in cancer genetics. And so now I work in cancer genetics as a cancer genetics specialist, looking after, I guess, the cancer side of things and prevention and all that. And I'm also doing a PhD because, it gets you in the end. I'm also doing a PhD in cancer genetics, looking at precision oncology type things with Professor David Thomas, Garvin, and the most programs.
Fantastic. Okay, so tell us a little bit about the history of yoga. When was it formed and why was it formed? You've told us a bit about the need for it, but was there a particular impetus or a particular event that triggered its formation? Jess?
So it was formed back in 2014 by the current MOGA chair, actually, as well. It was one of the 3 founding members, so Dr. Demi Karikios, as well as George A. Young and Huey Lee Wong as well. And so they really tried to kind of create a bit of a network so it's networking amongst young oncologists, as well as trying to raise awareness about some of the workforce issues as well that are unique to junior consultants.
So you mean in a few years, Demi's going to form the old oncologists we don't want to retire society, and then he can get a special medal? On your Demi.
I am never going to say that about at all. And
That's
I think
a pretty good innings, yeah.
And I think one of the truthful things is even amongst the young oncologists, there's actually quite a few grey hairs that we don't really want to admit so much about.
There's more of the old oncologists wanting to join yoga, I think, than the other way around. Milita, did you hear about yoga as a trainee and were you reassured that it was there for you?
Yeah, I guess I took a little bit of time, extra time finishing training. You work part-time, you have children, etc. So a lot of my colleagues, including Jess, finished before me. And so I knew they were part of yoga and I wanted to be part of it. They got to go back in the days before COVID. They got to go to these, events and they would all go to this, some exotic location and have workshops. So I wanted to be part of it, definitely, when I was a trainee. And it sort of, I guess, cracked up to be everything that I thought it would be, except now these days we don't get to travel.
So what sort of things does yoga do?
So yoga does a lot of, in terms of professional development side of things. So we've got a few different workshops that we hold throughout the year. Our main one is held in normally Q2, and in that we go over things such as CV development, how to write a CV, how do you approach an interview, how do you go about that side of things, as well as different things that might be more topical as well. So in terms of diversity of pathways, different directions you can take in terms of non-traditional pathways as well. We also have a networking dinner at the MOGA ASM, and we also do a lot of networking as well. But we have also been part of developing a few different offshoot programs as well that we've gone on to develop with MOGA. And this includes the Oncology Professionals Advancing Leadership, which was with our previous chair, Ben Kong, as well as Prunella Blinman. Was part of that. And we're also developing a global oncology component as well.
Oh, fantastic. That's something after my own heart. I did want to ask, Milita, are there sister organisations or brother organisations around the world? Is this an area catered for in other jurisdictions?
Yeah, I think in Europe and in US there are larger groups, and especially with ESMO, there is a larger focus on the young oncology group. In Australia, I think we're a smaller group, but we can still, I guess, access some of the resources that are overseas. But some of the, I guess, things are a little bit different, and which is probably where yoga sits, I guess, tailoring it to the needs of the Australian setting. And I guess in the future, our hope is that we'll be able to collaborate more with other groups, which is a little bit more tricky at the moment. But I think when Jess and I joined the team, that was sort of what we were hoping for when we went overseas for conferences. But it hasn't really, we haven't had that opportunity at the moment.
That's because you haven't been overseas for conferences, not because when you went, there was nothing there to do. Okay.
Exactly. And networking's a bit hard over Zoom.
It's not as fun as over a beer, huh?
Yeah, that's right.
But you are catering for quite a diverse group of people. I would think it's a time in the career where certainly there can be major differences between men and women due to the age at which women, have a family. Your members must be in many different positions. What's the landscape like out there in the first 5 years?
For Jess and I and yoga committee at the moment, it's quite important for us that we address the diversity of the diverse group of people that are young oncologists. So part of that is gender, but also one of the things that we are noticing a lot is that in often these kind of committees or groups, the New South Wales and Victoria are quite well represented, but the rest of the states and territories are not so well represented.
One thing that always worries me, and you're both doing PhDs, do you have consultant roles or are you still fellows?
I have a consultant role, but obviously not in the traditional medical oncology space.
And I work as a medical oncologist as a consultant in a trials unit. But addressing what you're getting at there, I have also had multiple fellow roles in the lead up to this whilst doing a PhD.
We employ our PhD students as consultants, not as fellows. But I've noticed, particularly in Melbourne, people are fellows for a very long time because they're pursuing PhDs. And I think that really robs you of a lot of the early experiences as a consultant. What do you think about
That's
that?
Right. And I think, though, it's a chicken and egg kind of argument in some way. So I'm doing a PhD, and the reason I did cancer genetics is because I absolutely did not want to do a PhD. I did not want to be pushed into feeling like I needed to do a PhD to get a job. And then somehow I circled back to PhD because I just was passionate about what I'm doing my PhD in at the moment. But I think a lot of trainees feel that they have to do a PhD. And so I'm not sure that they're doing the fellow job because they're doing a PhD. They're doing the fellow job because there might not be consultant opportunities that are available to them, and they feel that PhD is something that they need to do to be able to access that opportunity.
I don't agree, because if your institution where you're doing a PhD can offer you a fellowship, a fellow position, but not a consultant position, I think they shouldn't be offering you a PhD. I think it's sort of a forced labour. You've got the qualifications. You should be employed at the level of your qualifications.
I'm glad to hear that, Eva. I think this is something that Jess and I have spoken about in terms of the ethics of. I think there's, from an institutional point of view, there is a demand for service, and the services require people to be there to provide that clinical service, whether it be trainees or fellows who have finished their training, but there isn't that long-term commitment to having a consultant.
Well, a pitch for anyone who wants to do a PhD and have a concurrent consultant, not fellow job, come and talk to me. I would encourage more heads of department to do that. I think that shows your commitment to the person, and it shows that you recognise their qualifications. So maybe that's something you can campaign for. But, there are people like me who feel that that system is not a good system. There's a lot of sort of intimidation when you're still a fellow. You're very beholden to the person who is supervising your PhD. You're not sure if you'll get a job there in the end. Whereas I find that in my organisation, there's 3 or 4 people who are consultants and concurrently doing a PhD, and they can operate on that equal level as to all the other people. They're doing equal work. They're making decisions as if they were the consultant.
One of the things that yoga tries to do is to make sure that we encourage and also represent diversity. And it's diversity not just in the geographical, gender, more traditional senses, but also diversity of pathways in oncology. And that's something that we try and help, especially the more junior fellows, to really see, and so they can find the direction that they want to go in as well. It'll work best for them.
How do you do that, Jess? Do you have a mentorship program? Is it formal? Is it informal? Because it's one thing to say that you're doing it. It's actually quite hard to do.
It is, and we've tried to make it as part of our meeting as well. So last year's 2-day meeting, on the second day, we had people who've gone through different pathways. The people that we have doing the practice interviews, we ensure they're coming from different areas of oncology. So you're more academic versus your trialists versus your more regional oncologists. What would they like? And just hearing from people who've taken different pathways as to what are some of the options out there, apart from what you might see if you've just been mainly in a tertiary metro centre.
Well, we are, Milita, pretty conservative overall, aren't we? I mean, the number of people who are practicing in the hospital where they trained, maybe they've been overseas, but really not to any other experience, and they've been there for a very long time. They stay in the job for a very long time. We're pretty traditional approach, isn't it? So how do you break down those barriers and say to people it's okay to move around?
I think it will happen by necessity. Certain places, there are just no jobs, and that, the trainee before you, who just finished before you, is still waiting. So there is that, I think that will be a push. One of the other things that we have been doing is that speaking, I guess, to trainees as well. So I do some talks with trainees, I guess, about dual training pathways and about alternative pathways. I think part of that is adjusting expectations, because I think when we train, we see our senior consultants, and that was a different time, and sort of their careers look different to what our careers will look like.
There's a lot of hidden secrets. I mean, when I finished my training and I finished my PhD, I had to wait 2 years for a job. So I just had another child to fill the time. Don't tell her that. But, there were periods in the past where there was a great shortage of jobs. There were other people who they were desperate. They'd go from registrar one day to consultant the next day because somebody, died or retired or there was some scandal and they left. So that sort of thing hasn't changed. But of course, people want to be more secure now. I think there's a lot more pressure.
I guess I don't really know this, but I suppose if I think about the number of trainees in Sydney that finish every year, and there's always going to be a shortage. Well, maybe not, but there is a shortage, workforce shortage in terms of the amount of demand and versus the amount of consultants that are working. But I guess I wonder whether there is really that much demand for all the trainees that are coming up and all the trainees that have finished in Sydney. Whereas there are demands, in the rural setting, so there might not be a job available. But, from where I'm standing, I can tell that in this community that there is that demand, and while there might not be the funding for that job to be created at the moment, there will be that job. Whereas I think if people think that they're going to work in Sydney, and I guess I'm just not quite sure, and maybe this is me being pessimistic, that all of that, that there's enough demand to recruit all of those people who have trained and who want to remain in Sydney.
I'd encourage people to think about moving. I know that's hard to say, and especially if you've got a family, it's not always easy. But, there is this tradition that you should only look at the place where you've trained or the other shiny hospital nearby, and, you couldn't possibly move around. Everyone I know who's moved has found it invigorating and, interesting. But it is a time of uncertainty for you, isn't it? In a time where you've probably got a lot more economic pressures than we had because of the very low wage growth compared to, say, housing. I left Sydney 5 years ago. We sold our house. If we want to go back from Melbourne, we will be living in a garage. We just cannot afford anything back in the market.
I bet you wish that you didn't sell the place. It's probably worth a mint now.
Look, you know what? Yeah, you do what's right at the time. And one of the things as you get older is you realise there are things you can control and things you can't control. And my mantra is to try not to regret anything I do. Sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. But I think do what you want to do and try not to stress about the future and over-plan. There is so much demand for oncology and oncology services. I think what we haven't got right, though, is the distribution of work. And we've got a few people doing a lot of the work rather than the other way around. I think that particularly disadvantages women. Jess, is that a fair comment from your perspective?
I think it is. And so there's, in particular, I think geographically, there's a huge difference in terms of the workload that you see depending on where you're geographically based as an oncologist. And it's hopefully the funding will match in the future for the areas that do need additional oncologists where you've got a higher patient load with particular complex comorbidities as well, and to assist in that situation, because I don't feel that we've currently got that equity at the moment. And hopefully with the MOGA workforce study that they're doing at the moment, that will address part of it. Another side of it is also from the young oncs component. There is a significant amount of stress that all of this workforce discrepancy causes. And especially when you're looking at those in front of you, what's happened, what's gone on, how long do they have that unemployment or semi-employment period, it does cause distress amongst those in the years below. And it does contribute, particularly when you talk about burnout a lot, you talk about the additional stresses, you talk about the stresses of COVID, and then you've got this additional stress of, but I'm not even sure exactly where I'm going, how I'm going to find more stable employment. Looking at those above me, it does create that extra layer on top.
Yeah, I remember being in that position, but I do think the stresses were there, and the process was perhaps not as transparent. It was a lot of jobs for the boys, and I went for a number of jobs that one of them, the person's cousin was on the interview panel and they got the job. I mean, but on the other hand, I recognise that it is a major stress today because of just how many people there are, how many positions there are, all the politics, etc. It was, I'm not trying to say that it was just as bad in our days, but it is something that people face. And again, comes back to my philosophy that, if people are doing research and you think that they are an academic person suitable for your research, then they should be an academic consultant suitable for your centre. So you can try and see if you can get more people to share that philosophy. So, Milita, what other concerns do young oncologists have?
I think that's the sort of the primary thing that sort of when people come up, that's the main thing that people probably experience. But also, I guess, how to the things that you learn, so the medical side of things, how to manage all those kind of things, I think people have got that by the time, they finish training. But it's all those other things, the sort of, the adulting or sort of, working as a consultant, the sort of paperwork and all sorts of other sort of institutional things, advocating for things, getting sort of, I guess, funding or getting things that, getting the hospitals to support you or wherever you're working support you in some of your endeavors. All those things I think are not really things that we learn as much or we don't really get training in. So those are sort of things that I think are also challenging, and I suppose where yoga tries to focus our attention on the sort of the professional development side of things. So whether that be public speaking or leadership skills or, thinking about other ways of doing things.
And Jess, the one thing that is definitely sort of better for you is this more talk of work-life balance. I don't know if you've got more work-life balance, but at least it's talked about a bit more.
Oh, it's fantastic. And it's good that it's being recognised. You're right. At this particular moment today, work-life balance for myself is not there. But the fact that people are considering it and it's crossing people's minds is really good. I've had the opportunity to work with people who have made sure that they don't work full-time, that they have part-time work instead so that they can have a work-life balance. This isn't a gender-based component. These are both male and female medical oncologists going, I want to see my family more often. I want to be involved in these different components and I want to get these other things done. So these people have actually actively gone out to ensure that their workplace is catered for that and ensure that they've got those hours available, which is great.
So more role models there than possibly what we had. Milita, are you also a talker but not a doer of work-life balance?
No, I think I have actually quite a fair bit of work-life balance.
Great.
A lot of that I've had to advocate for that myself, but I guess you learn, don't you, that you need to look after yourself. So, I get better, I think, every year at maintaining or at improving work-life balance. But, I'm working part-time and I do a full-time PhD, but I decided sort of the second half of the year that actually the demands of COVID and a few other challenges at work out of our control means that actually the work-life balance wasn't there. And so I've taken a little break from my PhD currently, which, is not something that is commonly done. But, I think it's important to look after yourself because when you're functioning, when you've got that right mental space, or then you can actually do better. So, the plan is next year, all those things are better under control.
And, we had a lot of pressure. It was a real race in my day, but we were all undergraduate medical students. So, I was an intern at 21. I was a fully qualified oncologist at 29. You've got a different demographic now, particularly with the postgraduate medical training. How has that impacted on young oncology?
I did undergraduate training, but it just meant that I had more time to start a family and, work part-time during my training. And I think medical oncology in general is actually really good in that sort of is able to happen from a training point of view.
But I think, if I can give you a bit of advice, it is no race. Once you get to the end, you're there for 40 years or 45 years or 35 years. It doesn't really matter. And I think that taking that time, in my day, I can only remember one person who was pregnant as a registrar, and that was sort of quite an unusual thing. And
whereas it's quite expected now, really, that, you just have children while you're training. It's not unusual.
Yeah, no, I think that, and that's across all the medical specialties and even surgeons now. So that's been a great thing to see. I can't think of anyone who did training part-time in my era. So I think that's also another major advantage. One thing that where women were disadvantaged was this hopping off overseas. I guess that's my bee in my bonnet that I never got to go and live, I got my PhD but I never got to go and live overseas and hang around in London with all the people at the Marsden and is that an issue for the young oncologists?
These days, a lot of the female trainees or female young oncologists, they have been overseas with their children. And I think it's probably speaks to the change in society and the sort of the gender roles. It's evolving over time.
I think that's the point. Make it work for you. I'm going to change to something a little bit different. I mean, you guys are so lucky. We have a lot of effective treatments. We still have a lot of people that we can't help in oncology, but, at least I'm in the era where we have some fantastic treatments for patients, people who retired, say, 10 years ago, who really had 5FU, and that was about all, bit of adriamycin. But it's a really exciting time to be in oncology. Does that come through in how your members feel?
Absolutely. I think it's fantastic.
I was just going to say that I remember hearing Professor Tatterson speak about the drugs he had available when he was, a young budding medical oncologist. No one wanted to do the job because, again, they just had 5FU and there were no sort of symptom control kind of medications. So I think we're very lucky. And the trouble now is keeping up with the latest, medications and the treatment options.
That is true, though. I mean, particularly not only with the amount of information coming, but all of the various resources, so many of which are available, you could be overwhelmed. And of course, if you really want the best one, just listen to OJC podcast every week and you'll be up with the latest. Even the Oncology News Australia newsletter is fantastic. You could actually feel very overwhelmed that you haven't read every journal. I actually find Twitter is very good. Do you guys use Twitter?
Use Twitter. Had to learn how to use Twitter.
I'm warming up to it.
I'd say that neither of us are particularly great at using Twitter, and it's something that we've been trying to learn.
But I definitely find that I learn things from Twitter, like lots of, it's just nice to get a bite-sized summary that someone, talks about a paper or they retweet a paper. I think it is a really good way of just getting that exposure. And then, if it's something relevant, then you might look into it a bit more and actually go ahead and read the paper.
Yeah, I'd encourage you to do that because you can tweet anything. You can make anything look good. And so that's one of the downsides. But then again, in the Twitterverse, people will keep you honest and say no. So, the arguments about disease-free survival versus overall survival for adjuvant therapy and the fierce Twitter wars over this is the new gold standard. No, it isn't. So you do have those balances. What about the issue of how patients want to interact with their oncologist? Emails. We were fortunate you had to ring the secretary and no one ever answered the phone, so they could never get on to the oncologist. But now you're really accessible to patients and nurses and, 24/7. And how does that accessibility and everyone knows where you are, how does that manifest in terms of people's just feeling overwhelmed and also privacy?
So I use email to communicate with patients, but on my emails, I also have my times written down and my availabilities. And I tell people when they're sending emails that about, duration of response, like what sort of a time period to expect a response to help manage that side of expectations and to go through it that way instead. I quite like email, to be honest, because you don't have to stop the current conversation you're having. You don't have to interrupt what you're currently doing. You can finish seeing the patient you're with, finish off that meeting, and especially if it's something where it needs a reply that day, but not that second.
Milita?
I haven't been as good. Well, actually, emails were working fine for me up until COVID hit.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, EMR, which is the great savior, we think, to everything, actually the workload increase has been well documented, particularly in the US where there's a demand because of billing for documentation. But it's actually really also impacted. People will go home from the hospital, but then have a couple of hours of updating the EMR. Is that of concern to young oncologists? Because we're too old to use them. The EMR. So
I like EMR. I absolutely do see the issue with going over time in terms of the day-to-day side of things. But from the clinical trial side of things and being able to adapt and to respond quite quickly to things, and I enjoy it. I'm sorry.
no, don't apologise.
I think that with EMR, when you start off as a trainee, the sort of the level of detail in your notes, is really high, and I think we spend a lot of time completing the entry. And I think as you become more senior, the entry sort of narrows down and becomes a bit more pertinent and sort of more sort of to the point.
It's also checking results. People feel guilty. I'll just check and see what's happened to the patient and the result's not through, so I'll go home and then I'll check it. Isn't that the sort of rabbit hole?
Yes, absolutely. That is a rabbit hole, and that is quite, yes, a dangerous path that we were just talking about this afternoon before this podcast, of going down all these different directions.
So yoga is there to try and help with these sort of contemporary issues. And do you feel most people are engaged with yoga, or is it only just some of the young oncologists and other people don't want to have much to do with it?
I think people in New South Wales and Victoria and Canberra, I think they are quite well engaged. And actually in more recent times, Western Australia, have really had a lot more engagement from Western Australians, which is great. The other states and territories, I think, I don't know, Jess, what you think, but I think we could do better, and probably, some of that is the way that what happens after people finish training. So some places, they don't really have opportunities for young oncologists. So often they will go to somewhere else to do more, lingering, basically. So there may not be as many yogas around in those places.
So shout out to yogas, especially in Tassie, NT, South Australia, Queensland. Anyone interested, please follow the links and get in touch, because it sounds like it's a great organisation. We once did a debate when I was an intern at RPA against the consultants, and it was in the Great Hall of Sydney Uni, and we couldn't believe it. The hall was packed. There were over 1,000 people came to hear the interns and residents debate the consultants, and the topic was that we did it tough. So it was each side saying that they did it tougher than the others. It's not really like that, but it is fantastic that organisations like yours are born out of necessity, are there to help and mentor and deal with issues that come up. And I think it behoves all of us to engage and make sure that we're meeting the demands and we're helping in whatever way for the careers of young oncologists. So we have talked a lot about some of the challenges and some pretty serious concerns and issues and burdens of young oncologists. We've also talked about you being so fortunate as to being in the so-called golden age of oncology. There are a lot of upbeat things. We're attracting a lot of people into oncology now. Do you want to tell us about some of the celebrations, some of the great things from a young oncologist's point of view? Jess.
So I work in clinical trials at the moment. So what I am celebrating and enjoying are the fact that I constantly get to see new ideas come through and the new side of different drugs that are being developed, which for me is exciting, it's invigorating, it's something that really makes it great to come to work. Another side that I really enjoy is I do a lot of teaching. And there are so many people coming up that you get to be involved in teaching for who are medical students, junior medical officers, or advanced trainees who are going to be absolutely fantastic. And there's some people where you just look at and you're just like, you're going to be amazing at the end. It's just making sure that they've got everything there in place to help transition across, because we've got some great people through that are going to come through. And I'm just really hopeful that they can thrive and that we can help create an environment for them to thrive as in their chosen field.
Yes. Look, I mean, I think you're doing that in spades. But Milita, what about the camaraderie? Is there less competition than, say, back in my day when it was dog eat dog, really? Is there more camaraderie with allied health, more interdisciplinary discussion with PAL Care? You've got VAD. Is that a plus?
Yeah, I think actually we are doing oncology in a very exciting time. There's just, there are a lot of things that are happening and there are a lot of things that are unknown, but we know that it's sort of on the horizon, and which makes us very sort of, I guess, thirsty for that, to make that next discovery. So there's the sort of the clinical, the research side of things, but then, as you say, the collaboration, the sort of the opportunity to work with in a multidisciplinary setting, which I think wasn't probably as much a thing as when you were, just starting out. So there's that, and there's the sort of the sense amongst the young oncologists that we do want the work-life balance. So I think the future of when we are senior medical oncologists, I think, there'll be a lot more, we hope, work-life balance and the diversity in sort of the interests, doing other things. So there are people who are interested in global oncology, there are people who are interested in research, in, education, leadership, all the sort of different kind of opportunities that I feel like maybe in the past may not have been as readily accessible. And also the world has become much smaller with the advent of internet, and now with all our proficiency with Zoom, where we can network with lots of people, maybe not in a conference, but just by email or Twitter and all those kind of things, which I think there's just so much happening. It can be a bit overwhelming, but I think it's an exciting time to be a medical oncologist.
All right, you've made me want to be young again, something I'll never be able to achieve, but sounds pretty good from here. Once again, Jess Smith, Milita, Zaheed, on behalf of the Yoga Group, Young Oncologists Group of Australia, it's fantastic to hear from you and to hear about all your work. Keep it up, and thank you for being on OJC. Bye for now.
Thank you so much.
You've been listening to the Oncology Podcast. If you enjoyed today's edition and would like to subscribe, head over to our website, oncologynews.com.au, and sign up to our newsletter. Thanks for listening.